Hey, Mike Delpre here, Executive Director of the Arizona Real Estate Investors Association. And today, our goal and our mission is to keep you informed at all times if there's any changes to the market for our members and for real estate investors throughout the state of Arizona. And today is our legal update episode with Mark Zinman of Zona Law. Today, we're covering the spike in evictions, anti-landlord bills, and the lawsuit with the National Association of Realtors. So let's jump right in. All right, welcome. My name is Mike Delpre, Executive Director of the Arizona Real Estate Investors Association, and today we have our special guest, business associate, and one of the best eviction attorneys in the state of Arizona, Mark Zinman of Zona Law. How you doing, buddy?
Good, Mike. How you doing?
Great, man. Thanks for, like I said, taking time out of your day just to give us some updates, to let us know, us real estate investors, know what's going on in our world. Couple topics we're going to talk about today are the evictions, anti-landlord bills, and the whole situation with NAR. So we'll just jump in. And I read this, Mark. Maricopa County saw more eviction filings in October than any other month since the beginning. Gotta love this, the century. Landlords filed 7,948 complaints last month. What's going on?
Yeah, it's not a good headline. I mean, it's definitely intended, I think, is to catch some eyeballs, obviously.
It did.
And there's definitely a general anti-landlord narrative across the board. And so I think an easy way to focus on that is to focus on the numbers, which makes sense anyways. The court system actually publishes those monthly to a select group of people. And so what happens is the newspaper reporters get those numbers, and that's what's creating those articles. But the numbers are factually correct. I mean, I don't think they necessarily tell the full story, but I mean, it was approximately 1,700 evictions in the month of October.
So yeah, so my first question, which I love that point, right? The anti-landlord bills, headlines, the games being played, right? So what does that mean to us real estate investors? Like, so that's a lot, right? So that does mean something, the most since 2005, I think it was. So what's going on? Where are they coming from?
Yeah, I mean, really, I mean, the reality is what that article is not really addressing, or those types of headlines is not addressing, is the population increase that we have in the state. I mean, if you were thinking back, if we're comparing now to 2005, and we're an entirely different city and an entirely different county. In
Mm.
Maricopa County, as obviously most investors will know, and they kind of count on this, is that we've been the largest, fastest growing county in the country in the past 3 years, repeatedly. And so if you look back to 2005, right now we're exactly the same numbers that we were eviction wise in 2005, but our population's gone from like 3.5 and 5 to 4.6 million people. So
Wow.
if you think about it, we've had a jump of 30% in the population, but we're just now catching up to the volume of evictions that were being done. So on a per capita basis, we're significantly lower. I mean, if the eviction numbers had kept up to the population growth, we'd actually be over 10,000 evictions a year, and we're
Wow.
obviously not there right now. So I think it's, while the news is accurate, it's also misleading in the fact that you have to look at per capita to understand how the numbers change, because obviously it's no different than saying, well, yeah, we have more car accidents now than we did 60 years ago. Well, yeah, because cars weren't as prevalent. Here we just have a people issue and a volume issue, and so evictions are, the numbers will continue to increase, but you have to understand that in perspective.
Got it. And does any of this have to do like on a monthly basis? Is this the level it's at, or is this just like one spike?
No, I mean, the eviction numbers have been trending upward
Hmm.
for a couple months now, and I think they will continue to do so. Part of that's a function of I think rental assistance is starting to slow down and expire, and that was really helping a lot of residents pay. You also have, I had the first time last week in court, somebody say that their student loan payments were coming due, and they actually had to pay that first. So they paid that before
Hmm.
instead of paying their rent. And then I think also right now, credit card debt's been higher than it's ever been before. And
Yeah,
all of those kind of function as balancing where people's finances go.
man. So, and when you said rental assistance, were you referring to like COVID and all that? Okay, so it's
Yeah,
all.
like funds that are still coming out of DES, still available for residents. It's more difficult to get. It seems to be uh, causing some problems to actually get the money out fast enough. But that is slowing down.
And are you hearing anything from your clients where, okay, so maybe people are leaving these houses, but then there's also a low supply. So are people having trouble finding new places and maybe trying to stay in this place, the current place, as long as they can?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that. I'm not sure up to date. I mean, we've seen that historically in the past several months. Obviously, people staying, they didn't want to. I mean, the rents were going up for a long time. Obviously, it seems like
Mhm.
rents have obviously have plateaued recently. So it's not so much that, but previously, let's say even 3 months ago, you're not necessarily rushing to move if the place you're going to move to is higher rent anyway. So that the cost of moving, the increase in rent, all of that factors in. It seems like now I think renters probably have a bit more discretion in what they want to do and more negotiating power. We see the way I always think about this stuff, a lot of what you do is look to the multifamily, and that also trickles down to the individual investors, right?
Mhm.
Even though the product is different from a single family, but like we've seen more concessions coming back for the large multifamily operators, trying to get people just in the door, where that wasn't so much of an issue. Occupancy wasn't a concern before. So while we still have people moving here, there will be more building to catch up.
Got it. And so, does with a trend of increased evictions, is there any changes to the process in the filings on your end
Uh,
with for landlords?
Yeah, no, the process has been largely the same since all the COVID restrictions expired. I mean, the pat, start from 2020 through probably 2022. There was a lot of changes in the law, fluctuations with the executive orders, and then also what the court was making, Supreme Court was setting forth regulations as well. All of those have since expired, so theoretically back to normal in terms of the general process for Arizona. And of course, that'll, when I say normal, normal changes year to year. I mean,
Mhm.
every legislative session opens up in January, and a slew of landlord and tenant bills come in, and that'll happen in January of this year as well. So when I say back to normal, normal is fluctuating no matter what it is.
Okay. And so, and out of those, 7,948, not all of those actually get evicted, right? Is there like a ratio or a percentage that you're aware of?
Yeah, there's no ratio publicly made available, but that is an excellent point. I should have raised it, so thank you for noting it.
Mhm.
A lot of those articles focus on that, right? They say
Yeah.
7,900 evictions were filed. Well, evictions being filed doesn't correlate necessarily to people being removed. It's not like 7,900 families every year or every month are being removed from their properties. First off, there's a lot of duplication depending on names, but also a lot. The eviction filing is really the last line for a property owner or a property manager to get their
Mhm.
property back, to just get the tenant to pay. Property owners, investors, the ASREA members aren't in the business of doing evictions. They're in
Correct.
business of hopefully collecting rent and providing great housing.
Yep.
It's unfortunate a lot of times that tenants go through life difficulties and they're just unable to pay. But at the same time, the investor has to pay their mortgage and has to pay the cost of maintaining the property. And so they need the resident to pay. And if the resident's not, you can send notices, you can try and work, do partial payment agreements, all of which we suggest. If that still doesn't work out, though, then the only remedy a landlord really has is to do the eviction. And so a lot of evictions are filed where maybe the next week the tenant just comes in and pays. And that's
Yep.
great. The tenant gets to stay, the landlord gets made whole. I mean, frankly, for most cases we file where it's not like a criminal act or something where we're trying to protect somebody else and it's just non-payment. The hope is always that our clients get paid and the tenants stay in the property. We just did a
Sure.
quick breakdown of ours. I mean, there's no public numbers on that. The court, obviously, when they send out that email I mentioned, notice some indications that those aren't all removed.
Mhm.
I just did some basic numbers on ours, and it looked like last month, for example, of all the evictions we filed, only 12% of them they even ordered the writ of restitution. So that means
Yeah.
88% of the people either left on their own volition or they actually paid before court. And I think it was like 33% or something paid before court. And the rest may have just satisfied it afterwards and stayed and worked out a payment plan.
There you
Because
go.
a lot of the time, you get your judgment and then the landlord can accept partial payments. People always forget Arizona is a state where landlords can't accept partial payments ahead of time. But once they get the judgment, they can do what they want. So it gives them a lot more discretion to work with the residents without putting them in legal hot water.
Love it. They great for showing that. Because yeah, like you said, as RIA members or any landlords out there, you know, we we do our best to get the best tenant in there. We have a great relationship, and to actually remove the tenant, yeah, just through the eviction process, and not even counting counting the renovation of the property. So we would way more would love to have the tenant stay more than anything and work it out. So,
Yeah,
um,
we actually did a study. I think it was the Arizona Multi Housing Association did a study a couple years back on the average turn, and again, this was in the multifamily world, but they were figuring that every turn on a unit costs them, the owner $4,200 right off the bat just to turn it,
Yep. Wow.
and let alone the vacancy, let alone all the other issues. It's a significant cost to a landlord to do eviction. It's not what they want to do. It's unfortunately just at some point, if you're not going to get paid, you have to start incurring those costs to move on.
Correct. Love it. All right. So, and my last question on this would be, just for any landlords go out there, dealing with this situation, is there any like assistance out there for the tenants? Like maybe they're a good tenant, they're struggling, or for the landlord, any programs out there you could recommend?
Yeah, so DES within Maricopa County is the last government entity that really has funds left from CARES from the pandemic. So that's an option. We also still see St. Vincent de Paul and other type of charitable organizations that do churches, things like that, that do provide rental assistance as well. So I don't think you would, if you're in that situation, whether the landlord or the tenant, I wouldn't leave any rock unturned and kind of reach out to the usual suspects to see if they do have rental assistance available.
Perfect. All right. Any last thoughts on evictions before we move on?
No, I think the numbers are going to trickle up still a little bit. Obviously, that it's coming into the holidays, which is always an unfortunate time. I just think there's a lot going on in the economy, and a lot of times evictions are really kind of a forward-leading statistic on that, and so that's what we have to be aware of.
Is there any, okay, they got me thinking. So as an investor, is there any, what happens when there's a lot of in the future, like in the past, what have you seen after an increase in evictions? What's usually the next step that you see in the economy or in the market?
It totally depends on the market.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to go to the specifics on it. At least on the eviction side, it does often change what people are looking for in a resident as well, because people are worried about evictions on their record. But again, coming out of the recession in 2008, 2009, we saw a ton of people with foreclosures, and at that point, landlords are like, you know what, we don't care about foreclosures anymore if you've had one or not. So they adjust their standards just to make sure that they can keep their occupancy up, and that's kind of where you see clients starting to adjust to account for the market as well.
Perfect. All right. Perfect. All right. Well, let's jump into the anti-landlord bills, which we've have discussed before. And also, if you're, you should be reading the Azria Advantage, the monthly newsletter. Mark's always giving us great information. I think it was October's article you wrote about all these bills that you put together and the Arizona Multifamily Association put together as well. So can you just kind of let us know where we're at? I know we've been talking going into 2024 is where we need to vote, and we're right around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I mean, that's more than anything else is, for whatever issues that are important to you, your vote controls, right? That
Mm-hmm.
whether it's landlord tenant stuff, whether it's something else in your life, that's, this is the time to go out and vote, because 2024 will be a significant election for definitely Arizona and for the country as well. I think they're expecting the highest volume dollars coming into Arizona ever for a Senate race. So it'll be interesting to see. You'll start probably seeing commercials on the news now for, an election a year off. But yeah, that article, the Arizona Multi-Housing Association did a good job of putting together kind of all the proposed bills in 2023 that were just anti-landlord. And that means bills that would in any way really restrict what your rights are as a property owner and an investor. So things, obviously rent control is at the top of that list. I think there was 5 or 6 bills, different ways of proposing rent control last year.
Okay.
Notice periods. So instead of giving a resident a 5-day notice, maybe you had to give them a 15-day notice for non-payment of rent. Or even if you had, like, let's say you went through the eviction process, and instead of having the regular notice period for before a writ's available, they would extend that even further as well. And so it's really just to try, unfortunately, to restrict a landlord's ability, depending on how they operate, and then also the eviction process as well. So they're kind of tinkering both sides with it as well. And then there was a lot of things, I'm sure, Mike, this stuff on, the president, the entire executive branch of agencies has also proposed on a federal level a lot of ideas of getting rid of what they call junk fees, marketing concepts, things like that. And that kind of trickles down as well. Even though they don't have the control over those issues, they can basically push out to the states the ideas they want to see. And that's the kind of stuff that we see then legislatures start bringing forward in the states. And we saw that last year here.
And when we spoke last year, I think you mentioned that's the first time you ever seen the Fed ever go into like local government. or propose something. Is that the right same
Yeah,
scenario?
that's the first time I've really seen in the past. I would say it's all post COVID, right? Like 2020 and after is the first time I've seen the federal government it's definitely the executive to get into the landlord tenant matters.
Yeah.
Historically, it's always been a state's issue because your states are so different. Like the concerns we have here are going to be very different than a New York City, for example, where everybody's living on top of each other. Here, you're getting single family homes. Yes, you have apartments, but it's different practices, different interests. And so usually, historically, it's always been a states' rights issue.
Yeah.
But this is the first time they're kind of saying, hey, across the country, this is the stuff we want to see.
And so what are some things that you foresee, like what kind of impact does this do to the average landlord with these bills?
Well, I mean, there's no question it can have a huge impact. I mean, first off, obviously rent control.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is that on a very basic level, there is such a positive feedback for rent control, which amazes me. But if you ask the average person, even a lot of people that I know as managers answer that question, they think, oh yeah, rent control is a good idea. You know, I've got my kids
Hmm.
going out of college now. They got to afford a place. How is it so expensive? So they're like, oh, rent control sounds good. However, in practice, pretty much every economist in the entire world explains that rent control is a really bad idea and ultimately leads to a lot of problems and higher rents. And rent control, if you just think about it in the basics, it works for whoever's in that unit. But overnight, investors will chase returns, is what it comes down to.
Hmm.
And if you look at the large entities, whether it's buying single family homes as landlords, the investors as RIA members, they know they're going to figure out they need to get a return on their money. And if they're capped at like 3%, if they buy a home here and they're only going to get a 3% increase, well, if they can go to the stock market and get 7, maybe they'll do that instead. And then you
Hmm.
don't have new units coming on board, and it makes it harder for the current landlords to also improve their properties. I mean, the nice thing you see in like the apartments, for example, right now, the amenities they put into these apartments and the services they provide are amazing.
Yeah,
But if they can't make that return, those things start to fall off and you don't have that quality of representation anymore, the quality of housing.
that's true. Um, what about so is there what should we be doing? Like, is there websites or anything specific we could learn more, or is it just go vote, right? Because I know the mailers are starting to come in and everything. So who do we pick? Who do we check? You know?
Yeah, no, that's excellent question. Asri obviously is a great place for the source for that information.
Mhm.
I publicize some information there. Mike, I know you pushed out as well in terms of, what issues are out there. And that's what people have to decide on. To me, as an attorney, I don't care what side you pick. Just go out and vote. I mean, if
Yep.
whatever issues are important to you, realize that they're out there. And like I said, January, the 2024 session will kick off. Um, the everything's relatively stable now in Arizona, but again, it'll be the election in November that'll affect 2025, and that's where I expect to see a lot going on.
Got it. So November, that election period is when it all happens. Okay. All right.
Correct.
Perfect. And like, if you're listening now, like I said, Mark always writes in our newsletter every month. So I'm sure he'll be keeping us updated on this. And if you go to our YouTube page, and our podcast with Mark as well, we talk about it a few times over the last year. So let's move. Any last words on the bills?
No, I think we got it covered.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. So now the newest news. Oh, is it new news or is it just news?
I
Oh,
always say new news, newest,
new
but
news.
yeah,
Me
you're
too.
right.
Okay.
It's a
All
little
right.
redundant.
So, NAR, National Association of Realtors, and some residential brokerages, including units of Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, liable to pay 1.78 billion in damages for conspiring to artificially inflate commissions for home sales. What does this mean to us?
I mean, it's not overly surprising this happened. I think people were kind of crossing their fingers that it wouldn't. But if you think about it, the standard accepted rate on a residential, commission is 3% on each side of the deal.
Mhm.
And they kind of go to how that's broken down. You sign your contract with if you're selling, and then they put the buyer's half, the seller's realtor gives it to them. But the way the association works, everybody buys into that 6% concept. And there's a little wiggle room there, but that's pretty standard. And the argument is, well, that's collusion. That's affecting the consumer. It doesn't give the consumer much option to negotiate that. You either take it or don't, because the argument is all realtors are working together in cahoots to take that money from the consumer. Whether you believe that or not, that's the
Mhm.
argument. And so it's a class action trying to upend that 3%, 6% contractual setup to look for other options. What's interesting is I'm not sure. So the damages have been assessed. The damages can actually go up from there, which is interesting depending on what the court does. But I don't know what the alternative is. Is it just going to be everybody's open and then they still continue doing the 3%, but they just don't advertise it that way anymore? I mean, to me, you always have lawsuits, and the question is, okay, you have a lawsuit, damages were assessed. Now what's going to come as a result, right? Lawsuits are intended to get damages, but also invoke change, especially in this type of contract, in this type of situation. I don't know what the alternative is going to be. If it's just negotiate any amount you want, or go to some other formula, flat fees, which some small brokers have done, which is possible. But the basis of the argument was, buyers brokers don't do much work anymore. Why are they still guaranteed that set amount?
So setting the standard on this for the listing agent at 6%, they're saying shouldn't be there, or shouldn't be that standard.
Correct.
As well as the buyer's broker should get paid by the home buyer.
Yeah, or not have it controlled and not have it set as much, because they're not doing as much work anymore as they were.
Interesting times.
Yeah, it is. I think, though, people have to realize between that lawsuit, there's a class action lawsuit also with RealPage regarding controlling of rental rates. More and more class actions are going to keep coming to try and affect changes that may or may not happen through the legislature. So it's a good time to also review your lease to make sure you have a class action waiver in your lease.
Didn't
just
know that.
Something to think about.
What is that? What does that even mean? Like, help me out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, right now it's just, for the RealPage lawsuit, for example, is an argument that a lot of the landlords go to RealPage. They have a software that tells you what rental rates should be in that area.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
And the argument is in that lawsuit that, well, if you're signing on and using RealPage's information, you're supposed to advertise or rent it out at the rate that they suggest. And the argument in that complaint is, well, then if everybody's using it, they're artificially pushing rents higher, because rent can just be pushed higher and consumers will accept it. And so they use the rents over the pandemic to say, hey, rents went up, and that was because RealPage. Well, the problem is some landlords were sued in that, as well as the company RealPage, which provides the software. But if you have leases that have a class action waiver, that can hopefully avoid you being a part of that. Class action waiver being, hey, 50 people get together and sue one person. Class actions are just very expensive. Attorneys win a lot. And I mean, they win as their attorney's fees, whether they win or lose the case. That's where it comes down to. It's a lot of time the tail wagging the dog.
So, okay, a lot of questions. So RealPage, and there's other things like Retometer or Rentometer. There's like all these websites that just say, hey, these are what rents are. So one, the consumer, so someone's saying the consumer is getting taken advantage of some way because the rents are stated on this page. However, the consumer also does have the right to hire a real estate agent or a professional, right, to educate themselves on rent rates. Does that make sense?
Correct.
Yeah.
And landlords anyways can go out and find out what their competitors are. It's no different than a gas station. You look outside, you see the gas station price. Oh, they're at $3.79. Okay, I'm going to put mine at $3.78 and compete.
Oh, man.
All of the information is public anyways. The argument is that they're sharing the information and forcing rates, which I can't really opine on whether that's true. I don't even know how the system works, frankly. Yeah. That's just the argument.
Is some rumors I hear from other investors talking like over the lifeline of rent, like we're actually over the last like 100 years or whatever it is, we're actually where we should be if there was no ups and downs, just the trajectory of going
a straight line.
Yeah. So
that's
don't
incredible.
know. I heard that quite a few times. So interesting. So I didn't know about that. So class action waiver. So what does that waiver? What do you say?
It's very simple. It just says in the event of any litigation, the parties agree not to be a part of a class action, whether as a representative or as a member. And that way, if people have individual damages and they want to file suit, great. But class actions it's an entirely different beast of litigation. It really gets expensive, and it's not really generally beneficial even for the members themselves. You see like Facebook class actions and people get like $1, and then the attorneys get millions of dollars. So
yeah, that's been a big talk about this whole NAR situation of the attorneys. Was the agenda of the attorneys representing the class action and the fees, like you said, they get? I don't know. I don't know that whole story, but
yeah, no, I don't know either. And that's why I'm always curious though, what is the change after? What's going to happen if this isn't allowed? What is the alternative?
There you go. Cool, man. Thanks for the clarification. Because I need to do some more updating on that, but I'm glad you came on and helped me out here. So, any last thoughts? We're wrapping up our time here. We went over three important subjects. Anything else?
No, keep up the good fight, Mike. You're doing an excellent job. It's great to be a member at Ezria. I know the information you get out to everybody is excellent, so I appreciate it
We
just
couldn't
as
do it
much as
without
I
you, man.
participated.
Thank you. And will you be there on Monday? Are you able to make it or?
We will be there. Absolutely. Yep. We'll get our table there.
Awesome. All right, Mark, appreciate it. And that's a wrap. And there you have it. That was Mark Zinman of Zona Law. So if you ever need any legal assistance in real estate, go to zona.law, ask for Mark Zinman. And if you are an ASREA member, make sure to let them know you are a member because you do get benefits and discounts as an ASREA member. So if you like that information, give us a like, subscribe to the ASREA YouTube page, and also if you drop down into the description, we have a link to tons of real estate investing free ebook. So whether it's wholesaling, flipping, landlording, we got an ebook that will show you the ropes in real estate investing. So thank you for your time. See you on the next one.